Welcome back to Obscure Chronicle, where we unearth the forgotten, explore the strange, and tell the stories history left behind. I'm your guide through the weird, the hidden, and the overlooked corners of the past. Today, we're diving deep into the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a mystery that has been buried for decades, waiting for someone to piece together the truth. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's explore another forgotten chapter of history together. On the morning of February 27th, 1959, two Soviet search and rescue volunteers named Koptolov and Sharavin were trudging through knee-deep snow in the northern Ural Mountains when they made a discovery that would haunt investigators for over 65 years. There, beneath a fallen cedar tree, lay two bodies, nearly naked, frozen solid, their hands burned from desperate attempts to start a fire in temperatures that had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. These were the first victims of what would become known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a mystery so baffling that it would spawn dozens of theories, government cover-up allegations, and endless speculation about everything from secret military experiments to supernatural forces. 9 experienced hikers had entered these mountains 3 weeks earlier, all of them students and graduates from the prestigious Ural Polytechnic Institute. All of them seasoned mountaineers who had conquered some of the Soviet Union's most challenging peaks. Their leader was a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant inventor who had designed his own portable stove and radio equipment, specifically for extreme expeditions like this one. They were attempting a Category 3 trek, the highest difficulty rating in Soviet mountaineering. Their destination was Ototen Mountain, a remote peak whose name means "don't go there" in the local Mansi language. None of them would make it back alive. Tonight we're going to follow these 9 young adventurers on their final journey. We'll examine every detail of their preparation, their personalities, their final days together. Because to understand what happened on that mountain, we first need to understand who these people were and why they chose to venture into one of the most remote and dangerous places on Earth in the dead of winter. This is the tale of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. The story of how 9 brilliant young people walked willingly into the darkness of the Ural Mountains, never knowing they were walking toward their deaths. To understand this expedition, we must first understand the man who conceived it, planned it, and led it to its tragic end. Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov was born on January 13th, 1936, in the industrial town of Pervouralsk, about 40 kilometers west of what would later become Yekaterinburg. He grew up in Stalin's Soviet Union, in a world where physical fitness, outdoor adventure, and technical innovation were not just encouraged, but seen as essential qualities of the ideal Soviet citizen. From his earliest years, Igor displayed 2 characteristics that would define his short life: an exceptional technical mind and an insatiable hunger for wilderness adventure. While other children played with toys, Igor was taking apart radios and rebuilding them. While his classmates stayed indoors during harsh Siberian winters, Igor was learning to ski, to navigate by compass, to survive in conditions that could kill the unprepared. By the time he entered the Ural Polytechnic Institute to study radio engineering, Igor had already established himself as someone special. His professors remember a student who didn't just learn the curriculum, he improved upon it. In his second year, he designed and built a radio communication device that hiking groups used successfully on expeditions to the Sion Mountains in 1956. But Igor wasn't content to just build equipment and send others to test it. He wanted to push the boundaries himself. He joined the Institute's hiking club and quickly rose through its ranks, not through politics or charm, but through sheer competence. His fellow students remember him as methodical in his planning, careful in his preparation, but absolutely fearless when it came to taking on challenging routes. Igor had a particular fascination with winter mountaineering. While most hikers preferred the relative safety and comfort of summer expeditions, Igor was drawn to the brutal honesty of winter in the wilderness. There were no second chances in -40-degree temperatures, no room for error when a single mistake could mean death for an entire team. It was this environment that truly tested a person's skills, their equipment, their mental toughness. By 1958, Igor had completed 16 ski expeditions, leading 9 of them himself. He had developed a reputation as someone who could be trusted with other people's lives in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. When the Institute's sports committee needed someone to lead a Category 3 expedition, the highest and most dangerous classification in Soviet mountaineering, Igor Dyatlov was the obvious choice. The idea for the Ural expedition came to Igor in late 1958. Ural Mountain, standing at 1,234 meters, wasn't the highest peak in the northern Urals, but it was one of the most remote and challenging to reach in winter conditions. The mountain's name, which means don't go there in the Mansi language, should perhaps have been taken as a warning, but for Igor the difficulty was precisely the point. This would be more than just another hiking trip. This would be a statement, a proof that Soviet youth, properly trained and equipped, could conquer any challenge nature could present. It would require crossing over 300 kilometers of wilderness in the dead of winter, with temperatures dropping as low as -40 degrees Celsius. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would earn recognition from the Institute's sports committee and establish Igor's reputation as one of the Soviet Union's premier expedition leaders. But Igor was too careful, too methodical to attempt such a challenge alone. He would need a team of the most experienced, most reliable hikers he could find. People who could handle extreme cold, difficult terrain, and the psychological pressure of being completely cut off from civilization for weeks at a time. The recruitment process began in December 1958, and Igor approached it with the same systematic precision he brought to everything else. Igor's first recruit was someone he knew he could trust completely, Zina Kolmogorova, a 22-year-old economics student who'd been on several previous expeditions with Igor. She was one of the few women in the hiking club, but she'd proven herself capable of keeping up with the men on even the most demanding routes. Zina was known for her quiet determination and her ability to maintain morale during difficult conditions. She had a gentle way of diffusing tensions when exhaustion and stress began to affect the group. Igor knew that on a Category 3 expedition, team chemistry could be the difference between success and disaster. Zina had grown up in Kamensk-Uralsky, about 200 kilometers southeast of Sverdlovsk. Like Igor, she had been drawn to the outdoors from an early age, but her path to mountaineering had been different. While Igor was motivated by technical challenges and the desire to push boundaries, Zina seemed to find something almost spiritual in the wilderness. Her diary entries from previous expeditions reveal someone who saw hiking not just as a sport, but as a way to connect with something larger than herself. She was also one of the few people who could challenge Igor's decisions without creating conflict. On a previous expedition to the Sayan Mountains, when Igor had insisted on pushing forward despite deteriorating weather conditions, it was Zina who convinced him to make camp and wait for the storm to pass. Her quiet authority and practical wisdom made her an invaluable second-in-command. Igor's second choice was Rustem Slobodin, a 23-year-old engineering student who specialized in industrial construction. Rustem brought a different kind of expertise to the team. He was a boxer and a martial arts enthusiast who had trained his body to withstand extreme physical punishment. More importantly, he had experience with emergency medical procedures, having completed advanced first aid training through the Institute's sports program. Rustem was known for his dry sense of humor and his ability to remain calm under pressure. During a 1957 expedition, when one team member suffered a severe ankle injury 3 days from the nearest road, it was Rustem who improvised a stretcher and organized the evacuation that likely saved the injured hiker's life. Igor knew that on an expedition as remote and dangerous as Otorten, having someone with Rustem's medical knowledge and unflappable temperament could be crucial. The third member Igor recruited was Lyudmila Luda Dubinina, a 20-year-old economics student who was perhaps the most experienced winter hiker of the entire group. Despite her youth, Luda had already completed more Category 2 and Category 3 expeditions than some hikers twice her age. She was known for her incredible endurance and her ability to navigate in whiteout conditions using only a compass, and her intuitive sense of direction. Luda came from a military family. Her father was a career officer in the Red Army, and she had inherited his discipline and attention to detail. She was meticulous about equipment maintenance, often spending hours checking and rechecking gear before expeditions. Her fellow hikers remember her as someone who never complained, no matter how difficult conditions became. She had a particular talent for finding safe camping spots in challenging terrain, a skill that had saved previous expeditions from disaster. But Luda also had a reputation for being somewhat reckless in her pursuit of adventure. She had once continued hiking for 2 days with a sprained ankle, rather than turn back from an expedition. She seemed to view pain and discomfort as challenges to be overcome, rather than warnings to be heeded. Igor respected her skills, but he also knew he would need to keep an eye on her tendency to push beyond reasonable limits. Igor's fourth recruit was Yuri Georgy Krivonyshenko, a 23-year-old engineering student who worked part-time at the Mayak nuclear facility, about 70 kilometers southeast of Sverdlovsk. This job gave Krivonyshenko access to specialized cold weather equipment and materials that weren't available to civilian hikers. He was also one of the group's most experienced photographers, and Igor wanted comprehensive documentation of their historic expedition. Krivonyshenko was known for his infectious enthusiasm and his ability to maintain team morale during difficult conditions. He had a talent for storytelling and would often entertain the group with elaborate tales during long evenings in the tent. But he also brought serious technical skills to the expedition. His work at Mayak had given him experience with precision instruments and emergency procedures that could prove valuable in extreme conditions. There was something else about Krivonyshenko that made him valuable to Igor. He had security clearance to travel in restricted areas near the Mayak facility. The route to Ural Mountain would take them through zones that were technically off-limits to civilian hikers. Having someone with official credentials could help them avoid problems with military patrols or border guards. The fifth member Igor selected was Yuri Doroshenko, a 21-year-old economics student who was Krivonyshenko's best friend and frequent hiking partner. The two Yuris, as they were known in the hiking club, had completed 6 expeditions together and had developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations. Igor knew that this kind of partnership could be invaluable in emergency situations. Doroshenko was the group's expert on winter survival techniques. He had spent summers working as a guide for hunting parties in the northern forests and had learned traditional survival methods from experienced woodsmen. He could start a fire in wet conditions, construct emergency shelters from natural materials, and identify edible plants and safe water sources. These skills might seem less important on a planned expedition with modern equipment, but Igor knew that in truly extreme conditions, traditional knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Doroshenko was also known for his physical strength and endurance. At just over 6 feet tall and powerfully built, he could carry heavier loads than most of his teammates and still maintain the pace necessary for long-distance winter hiking. His presence gave the team additional carrying capacity for emergency supplies and backup equipment. Igor's sixth choice was Alexander Sasha Kolevatov, a 24-year-old physics student who was the oldest member of the expedition. Kolevatov brought a different perspective to the group. He was more cautious and analytical than some of the younger members, but his experience and maturity made him a natural leader when Igor needed to delegate responsibilities. Kolevatov had completed military service before entering the university, and his time in the army had taught him valuable lessons about organization, discipline, and risk management. He had a methodical approach to problem-solving that complemented Igor's more intuitive leadership style. When the group encountered unexpected challenges, Kolevatov could be counted on to think through all the options and identify potential consequences that others might miss. He was also the group's backup navigator. While Igor handled primary navigation duties, Kolevatov maintained independent position calculations and could take over if something happened to the expedition leader. This redundancy was essential on a Category 3 expedition, where a navigation error could leave the team stranded hundreds of kilometers from help. The seventh member Igor recruited was Nikolai Kolya Thibaut Brignol, a 23-year-old engineering student whose unusual surname hinted at French ancestry from generations past. Thibaut Brignol was perhaps the most technically minded member of the group after Igor himself, specializing in precision mechanics and instrument design. What made Thibaut Brignol particularly valuable to the expedition was his experience with extreme cold weather equipment testing. He'd spent the previous summer working at a research station in the Arctic, where temperatures regularly dropped below -50 degrees Celsius. This experience had taught him not just how to survive in extreme cold, but how equipment behaved differently at such temperatures, how metal became brittle, how batteries lost power, how even the most reliable instruments could fail when pushed beyond their design limits. Thibaut Brignol was known for his methodical approach to problem-solving and his ability to remain calm under pressure. During a 1957 expedition when the group's primary compass malfunctioned in a whiteout, it was Thibaut Brignol who improvised a backup navigation system using a watch and the position of the sun. His quick thinking and technical knowledge had prevented what could have been a fatal navigation error. He was also the group's backup equipment specialist. While Igor handled the primary gear selection and maintenance, Thibaut Brignol maintained detailed inventories and backup systems for critical items. He had a particular talent for field repairs, often able to fix broken equipment using improvised materials and tools. This skill could prove invaluable on a remote expedition, where equipment failure could mean the difference between life and death. The eighth member of Igor's team was Semyon Sasha Zolotaryov, and his inclusion was perhaps the most controversial decision Igor made during the recruitment process. At 37 years old, Zolotaryov was significantly older than the rest of the group, and he wasn't a student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. He was a World War II veteran who had served as a senior instructor at the Sverdlovsk Tourism Club, and his experience dwarfed that of everyone else on the team. Zolotaryov had completed over 50 expeditions including several Category 3 winter routes that had defeated other experienced teams. He had survived situations that would have killed less experienced hikers, including a 1955 expedition where his team was trapped by an avalanche for 4 days and had to dig their way out using only their hands and improvised tools. But Zolotaryov's inclusion created a delicate leadership dynamic. While Igor was officially the expedition leader, Zolotaryov's vastly superior experience made him a natural authority figure. Some members of the hiking club questioned whether Igor could maintain effective leadership with such an experienced veteran on the team. Others wondered why Zolotaryov, who could easily lead his own expeditions, was willing to serve under a 23-year-old student. The truth was that Zolotaryov had his own reasons for joining the expedition. He'd been planning his own attempt on Ural Mountain for several years, but had been unable to assemble a team with the necessary skills and experience. When he learned of Igor's plans, he saw an opportunity to finally complete a route he'd been dreaming about for years. He approached Igor with a proposal. He would join the expedition as a regular team member, bringing his experience and expertise, but he would defer to Igor's leadership and follow the younger man's plans. Igor recognized the value of having someone with Zolotaryov's experience on the team, but he also understood the potential complications. After several long discussions, they reached an agreement. Zolotaryov would serve as the expedition's senior advisor, providing guidance and expertise when requested, but Igor would retain final authority over all major decisions. It was a delicate balance that would require careful management throughout the expedition. The ninth and final member of Igor's team was Yuri Yudin, a 21-year-old economics student who was known for his exceptional physical fitness and his ability to maintain morale during difficult conditions. Yudin had completed 8 previous expeditions with various members of the group and had established himself as someone who could be counted on when conditions became challenging. Yudin brought several valuable skills to the expedition. He was an experienced photographer who could document their historic achievement, and he had training in emergency medical procedures that could prove crucial if someone was injured far from help. He was also known for his ability to maintain equipment in harsh conditions, often spending hours each evening cleaning and maintaining gear to ensure it would function properly the next day. But perhaps most importantly, Yudin was known for his judgment and his ability to assess risk objectively. He had a reputation for speaking up when he believed conditions were becoming too dangerous, even when it meant challenging more experienced team members. Igor valued this quality because he knew that on a Category 3 expedition, groupthink and the pressure to continue despite warning signs could lead to fatal mistakes. With his team assembled, Igor spent the final weeks of January 1959 conducting detailed planning sessions and equipment checks. The 9 members met regularly to review route plans, discuss contingency procedures, and ensure that everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. They practiced emergency procedures, tested communication equipment, and conducted final fitness assessments to ensure everyone was prepared for the physical demands ahead. The expedition was scheduled to begin on January 23, 1959, with the team taking a train from Sverdlovsk to the small town of Ivdel, then continuing by truck to the village of Vizhai, the last outpost of civilization before entering the wilderness. From there, they would ski north through increasingly remote terrain toward their ultimate destination, Ural Mountain. None of them could have imagined that within 3 weeks, all 9 would be dead, their bodies scattered across a remote mountainside in circumstances so bizarre that investigators would still be debating what happened more than 65 years later. but on that cold January morning as they gathered at the train station in Sverdlovsk. Their packs loaded with carefully selected equipment and their spirits high with anticipation, they were simply 9 young adventurers embarking on what they believed would be the greatest challenge of their lives. They had no way of knowing they were walking toward one of the most enduring mysteries in human history. The last entry in Igor Dyatlov's diary was dated January 31st, 1959. It read simply, "It's snowing, wind is strong. We're putting up the tent on the slope of 1079. Firewood is scarce, mostly damp fir wood." 20 days later, on February 20th, 1959, a search and rescue operation would begin that would uncover one of the most disturbing and inexplicable tragedies in modern history. What they found on that remote mountainside would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about survival, human behavior, and the forces of nature itself. This is the story of the discovery, a chronological descent into a mystery that grows more terrifying with each piece of evidence uncovered. By February 12, 1959, the Dyatlov group was officially overdue. They had planned to send a telegram from the town of Vyai upon their return, confirming their safe completion of the expedition. When no word came, concern began to mount among their families and fellow students at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. The initial response was measured. Experienced hikers knew that Category 3 expeditions often ran behind schedule due to weather conditions or route complications. A few extra days of delay was not uncommon, especially in the harsh winter conditions of the northern Urals. But as February 15th passed, then February 16th, the concern deepened into genuine alarm. Igor Dyatlov was known for his meticulous planning and reliable communication. If the group was safe, they would have found a way to send word. On February 17th, the families of the missing hikers formally requested that search and rescue operations begin. The initial response from local authorities was bureaucratic and slow, a tragic delay that would later be criticized as potentially costing lives. It wasn't until February 20th, 1959, a full 8 days after the group was due to return, that the first search teams were organized and deployed to the northern Urals. The search operation was massive by Soviet standards. Volunteer groups from the Ural Polytechnic Institute joined professional rescue teams, military personnel, and local guides familiar with the terrain. Aircraft were deployed to conduct aerial reconnaissance of the planned route, while ground teams began the arduous process of following the expedition's intended path through the wilderness. The searchers faced the same brutal conditions that had challenged the Dyatlov group weeks earlier. Temperatures dropped as low as -30 degrees Celsius, with fierce winds creating whiteout conditions that made navigation treacherous. The deep snow obscured landmarks and made progress painfully slow. For 6 days, the search teams found nothing. No signs of the missing hikers, no abandoned equipment, no indication of where they might have encountered trouble. The vast wilderness seemed to have swallowed 9 people without leaving a trace. Then, on February 26, 1959, everything changed. Student volunteer Mikhail Sharavin was part of a search team working its way up the eastern slope of what would later be designated as Dyatlov Pass. The area was a logical place to search. It lay along the group's planned route toward Ural Mountain, and the relatively open terrain offered good visibility for spotting signs of human activity. At approximately 3 p.m., Sharavin spotted something that didn't belong in the pristine wilderness. a dark object protruding from the snow on the slope above. Through binoculars, he could make out what appeared to be fabric, possibly canvas or tent material. The search team immediately changed course and began climbing toward the object. As they drew closer, the horrible truth became clear. They had found the Dyatlov group's tent, but the circumstances of its discovery would raise more questions than answers. The tent was partially collapsed and nearly buried under snow that had accumulated over the past 3 weeks. But it was the condition of the tent itself that sent chills through the experienced searchers. The canvas had been cut open from the inside, not torn by wind or damaged by external forces, but deliberately sliced with a knife or sharp instrument by someone inside the tent. The cuts were extensive and systematic. Multiple slashes had been made in the tent wall, creating openings large enough for a person to crawl through. The pattern of cuts suggested desperate haste. Whoever had made them was trying to get out of the tent as quickly as possible, without taking time to use the normal entrance. Inside the tent, the searchers found a scene that defied explanation. The hikers' belongings were scattered but largely intact. Boots, warm clothing, and essential survival gear lay abandoned. Most disturbing of all, the searchers found food that had been partially prepared for a meal, suggesting that whatever had happened occurred suddenly without warning. The tent's normal entrance was still properly secured from the inside, indicating that the occupants had not left through the conventional exit. Instead, they had cut their way out through the walls and fled into the deadly cold of a northern Ural winter night. But fled from what? Leading away from the tent, the search team discovered something that would haunt investigators for decades. A trail of footprints in the snow, preserved by the extreme cold and protected from wind by the terrain. The footprints told a story that seemed impossible to believe. 9 sets of tracks led down the slope away from the tent, heading northeast toward a line of cedar trees approximately 1.5 kilometers away. But these weren't the tracks of people fleeing in panic while properly dressed for the conditions. Analysis of the footprints revealed that most of the group had been barefoot, or wearing only socks when they left the tent. Some prints showed evidence of minimal footwear, felt boots or slippers that offered little protection against the snow and sub-zero temperatures. A few tracks indicated that some group members were completely barefoot, their feet leaving clear impressions in the snow. The implications were staggering. In temperatures that dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius, with fierce winds creating even more dangerous wind chill conditions, the human body could survive only minutes without proper protection. Yet the footprint trail extended for over a kilometer, suggesting that at least some of the group had survived the initial exposure long enough to travel a significant distance from their tent. The footprints were not scattered or random. They formed a deliberate line leading away from the tent toward the forest edge, approximately 1.5 kilometers downhill. What made this discovery so unsettling was the methodical nature of the trail. 9 sets of prints walking in single file, as if the group had left their shelter in an organized evacuation rather than a panicked flight. But the most disturbing detail was what the prints revealed about the hikers' condition when they abandoned their tent. At least 6 of the 9 sets of footprints showed bare feet or feet wearing only socks. In temperatures that had dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius, with wind speeds creating an effective temperature of minus 40, walking barefoot in snow should have been impossible for more than a few minutes before frostbite set in. The physical evidence defied logic. Search team member Mikhail Sharavin, who first discovered the footprint trail on February 26th, later described the scene in his official report. The prints were clear and well preserved in the snow. They showed no signs of stumbling or running. The spacing between steps was normal, suggesting the group was walking at a steady pace. But several sets of prints showed toes clearly outlined in the snow. These people were walking barefoot in conditions that should have killed them within minutes. The trail led the searchers through a landscape that became increasingly ominous as they followed it downhill. The footprints remained visible for nearly 500 meters before the wind and blowing snow obscured them, but their direction was clear, straight toward a line of cedar trees at the forest edge where the Lozva River made a sharp bend. On February 27th, following the footprint trail to its logical conclusion, the search team made their first grisly discovery. At the edge of the forest, beneath a large cedar tree, they found the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, the two Yuris who had been best friends and frequent hiking partners. Both men were found wearing minimal clothing. Doroshenko was dressed only in underwear and a torn shirt. Krivonishenko wore underwear and one sock. In temperatures that had been lethal even for properly dressed hikers, these two experienced outdoorsmen had somehow survived long enough to reach the forest edge nearly naked. The cedar tree itself told a story of desperate survival attempts. Branches had been broken off up to a height of 5 meters, far higher than either man could have reached from the ground. The bark showed clear signs that someone had climbed the tree, leaving behind skin and blood on the rough surface. Scattered around the base were the remains of a small fire, with evidence that the men had burned some of their remaining clothing in a futile attempt to stay warm. The condition of the bodies revealed the final moments of their ordeal. Both men showed signs of severe hypothermia, but also injuries that suggested they had fought desperately to survive. Krivonishenko's hands were burned, indicating he had tried to maintain the fire even as his fingers became numb and unresponsive. Doroshenko had bitten his own tongue, a common sign of the delirium that accompanies the final stages of hypothermia. But most disturbing was what the autopsy would later reveal. Both men had traces of radioactive contamination on their clothing. This detail, which wouldn't become public knowledge for decades, added another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable situation. The discovery of the two bodies only deepened the mystery. If Doroshenko and Krivonishenko had made it to the forest edge, where were the other 7 members of the group? The search teams expanded their efforts, using the cedar tree as a central point to conduct systematic sweeps of the surrounding area. On March 5th, searchers found the body of Igor Dyatlov himself, approximately 300 meters uphill from the cedar tree. He was found lying face up in the snow, his arms positioned as if he had been trying to return to the tent. Unlike the two Yuris, Igor was more fully dressed, wearing a sweater, pants, and one boot. But his clothing was inadequate for the conditions, and he showed clear signs of hypothermia. 2 days later, on March 7th, the search teams found Zina Kolmogorova and Rustem Slobodin. Both bodies were positioned along the same line between the cedar tree and the tent, as if they too had been attempting to return to their shelter. Kolmogorova was found 630 meters from the cedar tree, Slobodin another 150 meters closer to the tent. The positioning of these 3 bodies, Igor, Zina, and Rustem, created a disturbing pattern. They were spaced at regular intervals along the route back to the tent, as if each had collapsed in turn during a desperate attempt to retrieve warm clothing or equipment. But this raised another troubling question. If they had the strength and presence of mind to attempt a return journey, why had they left the tent so inadequately dressed in the first place? The preliminary autopsy results conducted by Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny at the Sverdlovsk Regional Hospital revealed details that made the mystery even more perplexing. All 5 bodies showed signs of severe hypothermia, which was expected given the conditions, but several also showed injuries that couldn't be easily explained by exposure to cold. Rustem Slobodin had a fractured skull, not severe enough to be immediately fatal, but significant enough to suggest he had suffered a powerful blow to the head. The fracture pattern was consistent with blunt force trauma, but there was no obvious source for such an injury in the surrounding terrain. Igor Dyatlov had what appeared to be bite marks on his hand, and his knuckles showed signs of fighting, as if he had punched something or someone shortly before his death, but there were no other people in the area and no signs of a struggle around his body. By March 8th, 5 bodies had been recovered, but 4 members of the expedition remained missing: Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. The search teams faced a terrible reality. With spring approaching, the melting snow would make the terrain increasingly treacherous and could wash away crucial evidence. The decision was made to suspend the search until the snow melted sufficiently to allow more thorough exploration of the area. It was a heartbreaking choice for the families of the missing, but the searchers had exhausted all possibilities in the immediate vicinity of the tent and cedar tree. For 2 agonizing months, the families waited. The 5 recovered bodies had already provided disturbing evidence that something extraordinary had occurred on that mountainside. The autopsy reports revealed injuries that seemed impossible given the circumstances: massive internal trauma without corresponding external wounds, evidence of extreme hypothermia, and radiation contamination on some clothing items. But nothing could have prepared investigators for what they would discover when the search resumed in May 1959. On May 4th, 1959, search teams returned to Dyatlov Pass as the spring thaw began to reveal the landscape that had been buried under snow for months. The searchers focused their efforts on a ravine approximately 75 meters from the cedar tree where the first 2 bodies had been found. The choice of location was not random. Melting snow had revealed traces of human activity in the area, fragments of clothing, pieces of equipment, and other signs that suggested the missing hikers had spent time in this location. What the searchers found in that ravine would transform the Dyatlov Pass incident from a tragic hiking accident into one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The 4 remaining bodies were discovered in a small stream at the bottom of the ravine, partially buried under 4 meters of snow. But the condition of these bodies was unlike anything the experienced search teams had encountered before. The body of Lyudmila Dubinina, the 20-year-old economics student who'd been so excited about her first Category 3 expedition, was found in a state that defied explanation. Her tongue was missing, along with her eyes and part of her facial tissue. The soft tissue had been removed with what appeared to be surgical precision, but there were no signs of animal predation or decomposition that would account for such specific damage. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, the engineering student whose technical expertise had made him invaluable to the expedition, had suffered massive skull fractures. The force required to cause such injuries was equivalent to being struck by a car traveling at high speed, yet there were no external wounds or signs of impact trauma. Alexander Kolevatov showed similar patterns of internal injury without corresponding external damage. His body displayed evidence of extreme force applied from within, as if he had been subjected to pressures that the human body was never designed to withstand. Most disturbing of all was the condition of Semyon Zolotaryov, the experienced expedition veteran whose inclusion in the group had been controversial. His chest had been crushed with such force that his ribs were fractured and his heart had been damaged. yet his clothing showed no tears or signs of external impact. The autopsy reports conducted by experienced Soviet medical examiners documented injuries that seemed to violate the laws of physics. The internal trauma suffered by the ravine victims required forces equivalent to those experienced in high-speed automobile accidents or explosions, yet the bodies showed no external signs of such impacts. Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, the chief medical examiner who conducted the autopsies, would later state that the chest injuries suffered by Zolotaryov were consistent with being struck by a car travelling at 100 kilometers per hour. But there were no cars on that remote mountainside, no roads, no possible source for such massive blunt force trauma. Even more puzzling was the selective nature of the injuries. While some victims showed evidence of extreme internal trauma, others displayed relatively minor injuries consistent with hypothermia and exposure. There seemed to be no pattern, no logical explanation for why some members of the group suffered catastrophic injuries while others did not. The medical evidence raised questions that investigators could not answer. What force could cause such massive internal injuries without leaving external wounds? How could experienced hikers, even in a state of panic, suffer trauma equivalent to high-speed impacts in the middle of an empty wilderness? Perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery of radioactive contamination on some of the victims' clothing. Soviet investigators, using Geiger counters, detected radiation levels significantly above normal background levels on specific items of clothing worn by some of the victims. The contamination was not uniform or random. Certain pieces of clothing showed high levels of radioactivity, while others, worn by the same individuals, showed no contamination at all. The pattern suggested that the victims had been exposed to a specific radioactive source, but no such source existed anywhere in the region. The discovery of radiation contamination added a new dimension to the mystery. In 1959, at the height of the Cold War, any mention of radioactivity carried implications of nuclear weapons testing, industrial accidents, or military activities. The Soviet government's immediate classification of the investigation files suggested that authorities were deeply concerned about the implications of this evidence. On May 28, 1959, the official investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident was abruptly closed. The final report, signed by prosecutor Lev Ivanov, concluded that the deaths were caused by a compelling natural force which the hikers were unable to overcome. The phrase compelling natural force would become one of the most analysed and debated conclusions in the history of criminal investigation. What natural force could cause such specific and devastating injuries? What phenomenon could explain the radiation contamination, the precise removal of soft tissue, and the massive internal trauma without external wounds? The official report raised more questions than it answered, and its vague conclusions satisfied no one. Family members of the victims demanded more detailed explanations. Fellow hikers and mountaineering experts challenged the findings based on their own knowledge of wilderness survival and the impossibility of the described scenario, but perhaps most telling was what happened next. All files related to the Dyatlov Pass investigation were immediately classified and sealed by the Soviet government. Access to the area was restricted for 3 years, with military patrols preventing unauthorized entry. For over 6 decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident has spawned countless theories attempting to explain the inexplicable. From rigorous scientific analysis to wild speculation, researchers, investigators, and amateur sleuths have proposed explanations ranging from the plausible to the impossible. Tonight we'll examine every major theory that has emerged since 1959, weighing the evidence, exploring the possibilities, and perhaps coming closer to understanding what really happened on that frozen mountainside in the Ural Mountains. The theories fall into three distinct categories: scientific explanations based on natural phenomena, military and government theories involving human activity, and fringe theories that venture into the realm of the unexplained. Each category offers compelling arguments, yet each also faces significant challenges when confronted with the full scope of evidence. Let's begin our journey through the labyrinth of possibilities, starting with the explanations that science has offered. One of the most scientifically grounded explanations for the Dyatlov Pass Incident centers on a meteorological phenomenon known as katabatic winds, combined with infrasound, sound waves below the range of human hearing that can cause profound psychological effects. Dr. Donny Eichar, in his extensive research for the book Dead Mountain, proposed that the specific topography of Kholat Syakhl could have created perfect conditions for katabatic winds. These are gravity-driven winds that flow downhill when dense, cold air moves from higher elevations to lower areas. The theory suggests that on the night of February 1st, 1959, powerful katabatic winds created a Kármán vortex street, a repeating pattern of swirling vortices as they flowed around the mountain. This phenomenon can generate infrasound frequencies between 8 and 12 Hz, which are known to cause anxiety, panic, and even hallucinations in humans. The physiological effects of infrasound exposure are well documented. At certain frequencies, these inaudible sound waves can cause intense feelings of dread and panic, disorientation, and confusion, visual and auditory hallucinations, physical symptoms including nausea and chest pressure, an overwhelming urge to flee the area immediately. According to this theory, the hikers were awakened by the terrifying psychological effects of infrasound exposure. In a state of panic and confusion, they cut their way out of the tent and fled into the deadly cold, their judgment compromised by the ongoing acoustic assault. The theory explains several puzzling aspects of the case. Why experienced hikers would abandon their shelter so hastily, the methodical cutting of the tent from the inside, the organized nature of their departure despite apparent panic, why they didn't return to retrieve warm clothing once the effect subsided. However, the infrasound theory struggles to explain the severe internal injuries found on the ravine victims, the radiation contamination, or the precise removal of soft tissue from Lyudmila Dubinina's body. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, Swiss researchers Johann Gormer and Alexander Puzrin published a study in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment that claimed to finally solve the Dyatlov Pass mystery through advanced computer modeling and snow physics analysis. Their research focused on a specific type of avalanche called a slab avalanche, a delayed collapse of wind-packed snow that can occur hours or even days after the initial disturbance. Using modern avalanche science and computer simulations, they argued that the hiker's tent was positioned on an unstable snow slope that eventually gave way. The researchers' model suggested the following sequence of events. The hikers cut into the slope to create a level platform for their tent. This cutting, combined with wind loading, created an unstable snow slab. Hours later, the slab collapsed in a localized avalanche. The moving snow struck the tent with tremendous force. The hikers, fearing burial, cut their way out and fled downhill. Unable to return due to continued avalanche danger, they succumbed to hypothermia. The 2019 study addressed several key pieces of evidence. The tent's damaged state could be explained by snow impact. The hikers' organized departure made sense if they feared burial. The delay between making camp and the incident explained the timing. The internal injuries could result from snow slab impact. However, critics of the avalanche theory point to significant problems. No avalanche debris was found at the scene by searchers. The tent was found relatively intact, not buried or severely damaged. The specific pattern of injuries doesn't match typical avalanche trauma. The radiation contamination remains unexplained. The precise removal of soft tissue from some victims is inconsistent with avalanche damage. Medical experts have long pointed to paradoxical undressing as a key factor in understanding the Dyatlov Pass deaths. This well-documented phenomenon occurs in the final stages of severe hypothermia, when victims experience a sudden sensation of warmth and begin removing their clothing. Dr. Murray Hamlet, a leading expert on cold weather injuries, has explained that paradoxical undressing occurs when the body's temperature regulation system fails. As core body temperature drops below 32 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the muscles controlling blood vessel constriction become exhausted and suddenly relax. This causes a rush of warm blood to the extremities, creating an intense sensation of heat that can be overwhelming to the hypothermic victim. In this confused state, victims often remove clothing despite freezing temperatures, seek shelter in small enclosed spaces called terminal burrowing, display irrational behavior and poor decision-making, experience hallucinations and disorientation. The paradoxical undressing theory explains why several Dyatlov Pass victims were found with minimal clothing, and why some appeared to have given their clothes to others. The evidence suggests that as hypothermia progressed, the hikers made increasingly irrational decisions about clothing and shelter. However, like other scientific theories, paradoxical undressing cannot account for the massive internal trauma, radiation contamination, or the surgical precision of tissue removal found on the ravine victims. While it explains the state of undress, it fails to address the most disturbing aspects of the physical evidence. The snow slab collapse theory emerged from detailed analysis of the campsite conditions and the hikers' final actions. This theory suggests that the group cut into the mountainside to create a level platform for their tent, inadvertently destabilizing a layer of wind-packed snow above their position. According to this theory, sometime during the night, this unstable snow layer collapsed onto the tent with tremendous force. The sudden impact would have caused panic, forcing the hikers to cut their way out of the tent from the inside and flee into the deadly cold without proper clothing. The theory explains several key pieces of evidence: the tent's condition, the footprints leading away from the campsite, and potentially some of the internal injuries found on the victims. A massive snow collapse could generate forces sufficient to cause the chest trauma observed in some victims. However, investigators found no evidence of a significant snowslide at the campsite. The tent was found partially buried but not completely covered, and the surrounding area showed no signs of the massive snow displacement that would accompany such a collapse. Additionally, this theory cannot explain the radiation contamination or the precise tissue removal found on Dubinina's body. The Cold War context of the Dyatlov Pass incident cannot be ignored. In 1959, the Soviet Union was engaged in an intense nuclear arms race with the United States, conducting secret weapons tests and military experiments across its vast territory. The Ural Mountains, where the incident occurred, were home to numerous classified military installations and testing facilities. The most compelling military theory centers on the possibility that the hikers inadvertently wandered into a secret weapons testing zone. The Soviet Union was known to conduct atmospheric nuclear tests, chemical weapons experiments, and advanced missile testing in remote areas of the Urals. Several pieces of evidence support this theory. Local residents reported seeing strange lights in the sky on the night of February 1st, 1959. These lights were described as bright orange orbs that moved across the sky before disappearing. Similar phenomena were reported by other hiking groups in the region around the same time. The radiation contamination found on some victims' clothing is perhaps the strongest evidence for military involvement. In 1959, radiation detection equipment was not commonly available to civilian investigators, yet Soviet authorities specifically tested for radioactive contamination. This suggests they had reason to suspect nuclear involvement from the beginning. A specific military theory involves the testing of parachute mines, aerial weapons designed to explode above ground level. These weapons were being developed by the Soviet military in the late 1950s and required testing in remote, unpopulated areas. According to this theory, the hikers were killed by the blast effects of a parachute mine test gone wrong. Such weapons could explain the massive internal trauma without external wounds. The pressure wave from an aerial explosion can cause devastating internal injuries while leaving the body's exterior relatively intact. The theory also explains the radiation contamination nuclear-powered detonators were being tested, the strange lights witnessed by other groups, the weapons deployment and explosion, and the immediate government secrecy surrounding the investigation. Another military theory suggests the hikers were victims of chemical weapons testing. The Soviet Union was actively developing various chemical agents for military use, including psychoactive compounds designed to disorient enemy forces. This theory proposes that the hikers were exposed to an experimental chemical agent, either through deliberate testing or accidental contamination. The chemical exposure could explain their bizarre behavior, cutting out of the tent, fleeing into deadly cold without proper clothing, and the apparent panic that led to their deaths. Some chemical agents can cause paradoxical undressing by affecting the body's temperature regulation. Others can cause hallucinations and extreme panic responses. The surgical precision of tissue removal on some victims might be explained by chemical agents that accelerate decomposition or attract specific scavengers. The Mayak nuclear facility, located approximately 200 kilometers from Dyatlov Pass, was one of the Soviet Union's most secretive nuclear installations. In 1957, just 2 years before the Dyatlov incident, Mayak was the site of a massive nuclear accident, the Kishtim disaster, which contaminated thousands of square kilometers with radioactive material. The official Soviet response to the Kishtim disaster was complete secrecy. The accident was not acknowledged until decades later, and the full extent of the contamination was hidden from both the Soviet public and international observers. Some researchers suggest that the Dyatlov Pass incident was connected to ongoing cleanup operations or additional accidents at Mayak. The radiation contamination found on the victims' clothing could have originated from contact with contaminated materials being transported through the region. This theory is supported by the immediate government classification of the investigation and the 3-year restriction on access to the area. Such extreme secrecy measures were typically reserved for incidents involving nuclear materials or state security concerns. While scientific and military theories attempt to explain the Dyatlov Pass incident through conventional means, numerous fringe theories have emerged that venture into the realm of the unexplained and paranormal. These theories, while lacking scientific evidence, have captured public imagination and continue to influence popular culture interpretations of the mystery. The UFO theory is perhaps the most widely known fringe explanation for the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Proponents point to several pieces of evidence that they claim support extraterrestrial involvement in the hikers' deaths. The strange lights witnessed by multiple groups in the region on the night of February 1st are central to this theory. Witnesses described bright orange orbs moving across the sky in patterns inconsistent with known aircraft or natural phenomena. These lights appeared to hover, change direction abruptly, and pulse with an otherworldly luminescence that defied conventional explanation. UFO theorists argue that the hikers encountered an extraterrestrial craft during their final night on the mountain. According to this theory, the aliens either abducted the hikers for experimentation or killed them to prevent disclosure of their presence on Earth. The surgical precision of tissue removal found on some victims, particularly Lyudmila Dubinina, is cited as evidence of alien medical procedures. The radiation contamination discovered on the victims' clothing is explained by proponents as residual energy from alien technology. They point to similar radiation signatures found at other alleged UFO encounter sites around the world, suggesting a consistent pattern of extraterrestrial visitation, leaving behind detectable energy traces. Some versions of this theory propose that the hikers were returned to the mountainside after alien experimentation, which would explain the timeline discrepancies and the strange positioning of the bodies. The missing eyes and tongue of Dubinina are interpreted as evidence of alien biological sampling procedures. The Yeti theory draws upon centuries of folklore from the Ural Mountains region, where local indigenous peoples have long spoken of large humanoid creatures inhabiting the remote wilderness areas. These beings, known by various names in local dialects, are described as powerful, territorial, and potentially dangerous to humans who venture too far into their domain. According to this theory, the Dyatlov group encountered one or more of these creatures during their expedition. The massive internal trauma found on some victims could be explained by the immense physical strength attributed to such beings. The apparent panic that drove the hikers from their tent without proper clothing suggests an encounter with something so terrifying that immediate flight seemed the only option. Proponents point to the large, unusual footprints found near the campsite that investigators could not definitively identify. While officially attributed to the hikers themselves, some researchers argue these prints show characteristics inconsistent with human feet, including unusual spacing and depth that suggests a much larger, heavier creature. The missing soft tissues from Dubinina's body are explained by feeding behavior typical of large predators. However, critics note that known predators in the region would have left different evidence patterns and would not explain the radiation contamination or the precise nature of the tissue removal. One of the most esoteric theories suggests that the Dyatlov Pass area contains a natural interdimensional portal or gateway. This theory proposes that the hikers accidentally stumbled through this portal into an alternate dimension or parallel reality, where they encountered hostile entities or environmental conditions that led to their deaths. The strange lights witnessed in the area are interpreted as manifestations of dimensional instability, visual evidence of reality itself fluctuating in the region. The radiation contamination is explained as residual energy from interdimensional travel, while the precise tissue removal suggests interaction with beings from another plane of existence. This theory attempts to explain the most inexplicable aspects of the case by invoking concepts from theoretical physics and quantum mechanics. Proponents argue that certain geographical locations may serve as natural weak points between dimensions, particularly in areas with specific geological or electromagnetic properties. The timeline inconsistencies and the condition of the bodies are explained by the effects of interdimensional travel. The hikers may have experienced time differently in the alternate dimension, or their bodies may have been affected by the fundamental differences in physical laws between realities. A darker fringe theory suggests that the hikers were victims of secret government mind control experiments. This theory proposes that Soviet scientists were testing psychoactive drugs or electromagnetic devices designed to influence human behavior and perception. According to this theory, the hikers were deliberately exposed to experimental compounds or energy fields that caused hallucinations, panic, and ultimately their deaths. The cutting of the tent from the inside and the flight into deadly cold are explained as responses to chemically or electronically induced terror and disorientation. The radiation contamination is attributed to experimental devices powered by radioactive materials. The precise tissue removal is explained as post-mortem procedures conducted by government scientists to harvest biological samples and study the effects of their experiments. This theory draws parallels to documented CIA and Soviet programs like MK-Ultra, which involved human experimentation with mind-altering substances and techniques. Proponents argue that the immediate government secrecy and the classification of the investigation files support the existence of a cover-up related to illegal human experimentation. While these fringe theories lack scientific evidence and often contradict known facts about the case, they continue to capture public imagination because they address the fundamental human need to find meaning in tragedy and explanation for the inexplicable. They reflect our deepest fears about the unknown, whether that unknown takes the form of alien visitors, mythical creatures, or the dark possibilities of our own governments. The persistence of these theories also highlights the inadequacy of conventional explanations to fully account for all aspects of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. When science and logic fail to provide complete answers, the human mind naturally turns to more exotic possibilities, however unlikely they may be. In the decades following the Dyatlov Pass incident, scientific understanding has evolved dramatically. The most significant breakthrough came in 2019 when researchers at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich applied advanced computer modeling to recreate the exact conditions on Kolasjachel that fateful night. The ETH Zurich study revealed a critical miscalculation that had persisted for 60 years. The slope angle at the campsite was actually 28 degrees, not the 23 degrees reported in original Soviet investigations. This seemingly small difference proved crucial in understanding avalanche dynamics at the location. Using sophisticated snow mechanics modeling, the Swiss team demonstrated how a delayed slab avalanche could occur on such terrain. The key factor was depth hoar, a crystalline snow formation locals call sugar snow that creates unstable layers within the snowpack. Under specific temperature and wind conditions, these layers can fail catastrophically, even hours after the initial trigger. The computer simulations showed how katabatic winds, dense cold air masses flowing downhill, could create the precise meteorological conditions necessary for such a delayed avalanche. These winds, reaching speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, would have been virtually silent until they struck the tent, explaining why the hikers had no warning. In 2020, the Russian federal government reopened the investigation, incorporating these new scientific findings. Digital terrain reconstruction, using modern satellite imagery, revealed that the campsite was positioned differently than previously understood, placing it directly in the path of potential avalanche debris. Recent attempts at DNA analysis on remaining physical evidence from storage have yielded mixed results. While degradation has limited the scope of testing, some samples have provided confirmation of victim identities and ruled out the presence of unknown biological material that conspiracy theories had suggested. The meteorological data analysis has been particularly revealing. Weather station records from 1959, previously unavailable to investigators, show that the night of February first experienced a rare convergence of atmospheric conditions that occur perhaps once every several decades in that region. Yuri Yudin, the sole expedition survivor who turned back due to illness, carried the weight of his friend's fate for over 60 years until his death in 2013. His evolving theories about what happened provide a unique window into how the mystery affected those closest to it. In early interviews, Yudin supported the avalanche theory, believing his friends had made a rational decision to cut their way out of a collapsing tent. However, as decades passed and he learned more about the investigation's inconsistencies, his certainty wavered. By the 2000s, he had begun questioning whether natural forces alone could explain everything. Yudin's most haunting observation was about the tent itself. Having helped set it up on previous expeditions, he knew how sturdy their shelter was. The precise, deliberate cuts from the inside suggested panic, but also a level of coordination that seemed inconsistent with a sudden avalanche burial. The search team members who discovered the bodies carried their own psychological trauma for decades. Many reported nightmares and an inability to return to winter mountaineering. Their testimonies, given years later, revealed details that were omitted from official reports. Strange atmospheric phenomena, unusual animal behavior in the area, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to permeate the search site. The families of the victims became reluctant guardians of the mystery. For many, the official explanations felt inadequate, leaving them to pursue their own investigations across generations. Children and grandchildren of the original victims have continued seeking answers, forming informal networks of researchers and maintaining pressure for continued investigation. The local Mansi indigenous people possessed oral histories about the mountain that were largely ignored by Soviet investigators. Their traditional name for the area, "Don't Go There," reflected generations of accumulated wisdom about the dangers of Kholat-Syakhl. Mansi elders spoke of spiritual significance and natural hazards that outsiders couldn't understand. Former Soviet officials who worked on the original investigation began breaking their silence in the 1990s. Their revelations about classified aspects of the case, including military activity in the region and pressure from Moscow to conclude the investigation quickly, added new dimensions to the mystery while raising questions about what information might still remain hidden. The Dyatlov Pass Incident has transcended its origins as a Soviet-era tragedy to become a global cultural phenomenon. Literary works inspired by the mystery have been published in dozens of languages, from serious investigative non-fiction to supernatural thrillers that use the incident as a launching point for fictional explorations of the unknown. Documentary productions from international broadcasters have approached the story from every conceivable angle. The BBC, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, and streaming platforms like Netflix have all produced major investigations, each bringing new resources and perspectives to the decades-old mystery. Hollywood and international cinema have created numerous fictional adaptations, ranging from horror films that exploit the supernatural theories to serious dramas that focus on the human tragedy. These adaptations have introduced the Dyatlov mystery to audiences who might never have encountered the historical case. Academic research has elevated the incident beyond mere mystery into a case study for multiple disciplines. Peer-reviewed journals in fields ranging from forensic science to psychology have published papers analyzing various aspects of the case. Universities use it as a teaching tool for critical thinking, research methodology, and the importance of evidence-based conclusions. The internet age has transformed the Dyatlov Pass incident into a cornerstone of online conspiracy culture. Dedicated forums, websites, and social media communities have emerged where thousands of amateur investigators share theories, analyze evidence, and debate interpretations. These digital communities have democratized the investigation, allowing global participation in ways impossible during the Soviet era. Video game developers have incorporated the Dyatlov mystery into interactive media, creating games that allow players to explore virtual recreations of the incident site and investigate the mystery themselves. These digital interpretations have introduced the story to younger generations while providing new ways to engage with the evidence. The Dyatlov Pass incident fundamentally transformed mountaineering safety protocols worldwide. The tragedy exposed critical gaps in expedition planning, emergency communication, and risk assessment that had previously been overlooked by the outdoor adventure community. Modern mountaineering expeditions now mandate satellite communication devices, GPS tracking systems, and emergency locator beacons, technologies that were unimaginable in 1959 but might have saved the Dyatlov group's lives. The incident became a case study in mountaineering schools across the globe, teaching new generations of adventurers about the deadly consequences of inadequate preparation and communication protocols. The establishment of mandatory check-in procedures for remote expeditions can be traced directly back to lessons learned from the Dyatlov tragedy. When the group failed to send their expected telegram upon return, precious days were lost before search efforts began, a delay that modern protocols are specifically designed to prevent. Equipment manufacturers also revolutionized tent design and cold weather gear based on analysis of what went wrong that February night. The fact that the hikers cut their way out of their tent from the inside, then fled into deadly cold without proper clothing, highlighted the need for emergency exit strategies and rapid deployment survival gear. The advent of the internet age brought unprecedented global attention to the Dyatlov Pass mystery. Online forums, dedicated websites, and social media communities have created a worldwide network of amateur investigators, each contributing their own theories and analysis to the collective understanding of the case. Digital mapping technologies and satellite imagery have allowed researchers to reconstruct the incident site with unprecedented accuracy. Google Earth and advanced topographical software have enabled armchair investigators to examine the terrain in ways that were impossible for the original Soviet investigators, leading to new insights about the campsite location and the hikers' final movements. The digitization of Soviet-era documents and photographs has made previously classified information accessible to researchers worldwide. High-resolution scans of autopsy reports, investigation files, and crime scene photographs have been analyzed by forensic experts, medical professionals, and amateur sleuths using modern techniques unavailable in 1959. Reddit communities, Facebook groups, and specialized forums have become virtual meeting places for Dyatlov researchers. These platforms have facilitated collaboration between investigators from different countries and backgrounds, creating a global think tank dedicated to solving the mystery. Some of these online investigations have produced genuinely valuable insights that have influenced official reinvestigations. The 2019 study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH Zurich, represented a watershed moment in Dyatlov Pass research. Using advanced computer modeling and modern understanding of avalanche dynamics, researchers Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin provided the most scientifically rigorous explanation for the incident to date. Their analysis revealed that the slope angle at the campsite was actually 28 degrees, not the 23 degrees reported in original investigations, a seemingly small difference that dramatically increases avalanche probability. The researchers demonstrated how a delayed slab avalanche could occur hours after the triggering event, explaining why the hikers had time to settle into their tent before disaster struck. The study introduced the concept of depth hoar, or sugar snow, a granular snow formation that creates unstable layers within the snowpack. This phenomenon, unknown to Soviet investigators in 1959, provides a scientific mechanism for the type of delayed avalanche that could have struck the Dyatlov campsite. The 2020 Russian federal investigation reopening brought modern forensic techniques to bear on the 6-decade-old mystery. Digital terrain reconstruction revealed new details about the campsite positioning, while katabatic wind pattern studies provided meteorological data that supported the avalanche theory. Recent DNA analysis attempts on remaining physical evidence from storage have yielded limited results due to degradation over time, but they represent the most advanced scientific approach ever applied to the case. These efforts demonstrate how modern technology continues to shed new light on historical mysteries. Yuri Yudin, the sole expedition survivor who turned back due to illness, became the most important living witness to the Dyatlov mystery. For over 60 years until his death in 2013, Yudin provided evolving perspectives on what might have happened to his friends, his theories changing as new evidence emerged and his own understanding deepened. Yudin's detailed interviews revealed intimate knowledge of the group's dynamics, their preparation, and their mental state before the tragedy. His accounts of Igor Dyatlov's leadership style, the group's experience level, and their equipment choices provided crucial context for understanding their decision-making on that final night. Search team members who discovered the bodies carried psychological trauma from their grisly findings for decades. Many broke their silence only in recent years, sharing previously withheld details about the condition of the campsite and the victims. Their testimonies revealed the emotional toll of the investigation on those who witnessed its aftermath firsthand. The families of the victims have maintained a generational quest for truth and closure. Children and grandchildren of the deceased hikers have become advocates for continued investigation, organizing memorial events and supporting new research efforts. Their persistence has kept the case alive in public consciousness and pressured authorities to maintain active investigation. Local Mansi indigenous people have shared oral histories and cultural interpretations that provide alternative perspectives on the tragedy. Their traditional knowledge of the region's weather patterns, wildlife behavior, and spiritual significance has offered insights unavailable to outside investigators. Former Soviet officials who maintained decades of silence about classified aspects of the case have begun speaking out in their final years. These revelations have shed light on the political pressures and institutional limitations that may have compromised the original investigation. The Dyatlov Pass Incident has inspired an extraordinary body of literature across multiple languages. Novels, non-fiction investigations, and academic papers have explored every aspect of the mystery, from forensic analysis to philosophical meditations on the nature of the unknown. documentary productions from international broadcasters have approached the story from every conceivable angle. The BBC's The Dyatlov Pass Mystery brought sophisticated forensic analysis to British audiences, while National Geographic's expedition-style investigation combined historical research with modern survival techniques to test various theories. Discovery Channel's multi-part series employed cutting-edge technology, including ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, to search for evidence that previous investigations might have missed. Netflix's documentary series reached global streaming audiences, introducing the mystery to viewers across continents and cultures. Each production has reflected its cultural context. Russian documentaries emphasize the heroic aspects of the search and rescue efforts, while Western productions often focus on the conspiracy theories and government secrecy angles. Japanese documentaries have explored the psychological aspects of group dynamics under extreme stress, while Scandinavian productions have examined the incident through the lens of their own winter survival traditions. Hollywood and international cinema have created numerous fictional adaptations, ranging from horror films that exploit the supernatural theories to serious dramas that focus on the human tragedy. The 2013 film Devil's Pass reimagined the incident as a science fiction thriller, while Russian productions have treated it with more historical reverence. Academic research has elevated the incident beyond mere mystery into a case study for multiple disciplines. Forensic science journals have published detailed analyses of the autopsy findings, while psychology papers examine group behavior under extreme stress. Meteorology studies use the incident to illustrate rare weather phenomena, and mountaineering safety publications reference it in discussions of winter camping protocols. Universities across the world use the Dyatlov Pass Incident as a teaching tool for critical thinking and research methodology. Students learn to evaluate evidence, identify bias in sources, and understand how incomplete information can lead to multiple valid interpretations of the same events. The internet age has transformed the Dyatlov Pass Incident into a cornerstone of online conspiracy culture. Reddit communities with tens of thousands of members dissect every photograph, analyze weather data, and debate the merits of various theories. Dedicated websites maintain comprehensive databases of evidence, witness testimonies, and investigative findings. These digital communities have democratized the investigation, allowing global participation in ways impossible during the Soviet era. Amateur investigators have made genuine contributions, discovering overlooked details in photographs and identifying inconsistencies in official reports that professional investigators had missed. Video game developers have incorporated the Dyatlov mystery into interactive media, creating games that allow players to explore virtual recreations of the incident site and investigate the mystery themselves. These digital interpretations have introduced the story to younger generations while providing new ways to engage with the evidence. International mountaineering safety protocols have been influenced by lessons learned from the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Modern winter camping guidelines emphasize the importance of emergency communication devices, proper campsite selection, and evacuation procedures that might have saved the hikers' lives. Today, Dyatlov Pass has become an unlikely pilgrimage destination for mystery enthusiasts, mountaineers, and those seeking to understand what happened on that February night in 1959. The Russian government has established controlled tourist access to the site, balancing preservation concerns with public interest. Annual research expeditions bring together international teams of investigators, scientists, and documentary filmmakers. These modern expeditions use GPS technology to precisely locate the original campsite and employ scientific equipment unavailable to Soviet-era investigators. The Dyatlov Foundation, established by families of the victims, operates a museum in Yekaterinburg that preserves artifacts, testimonies, and evidence from the case. Their educational initiatives ensure that the memory of the 9 hikers is honored while promoting continued investigation into their fate. Ongoing preservation efforts focus on maintaining the remaining physical evidence and recording testimonies from aging witnesses. As the generation that lived through the original investigation passes away, their memories and insights become increasingly precious historical resources. The actual incident location remains largely unchanged, a stark reminder of the mountain's power and the fragility of human life in extreme environments. Visitors often report a profound sense of solitude and vulnerability that helps them understand the challenges the Dyatlov group faced during their final hours. Contemporary adventure tourism regulations at the site require proper permits, experienced guides, and emergency communication equipment, precautions that might have prevented the original tragedy. These modern safety measures serve as a living memorial to the 9 hikers who ventured into the wilderness with courage but insufficient preparation for the extraordinary circumstances they would encounter. The legacy of the Dyatlov Pass Incident extends far beyond the mystery itself. It represents humanity's eternal struggle to understand the unknown, our need to find meaning in tragedy, and our determination to honor those who died by continuing to seek truth, no matter how elusive it may remain. And that's where our journey into the Dyatlov Pass Incident ends for today. But the mystery doesn't have to stop here. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten piece of history with me, make sure to subscribe to Obscure Chronicle and hit that notification bell. We're unearthing new mysteries and strange stories every week. What forgotten mystery would you like us to explore next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Your idea might become our next deep dive into the unknown. And if you're craving more mysterious content right now, check out our investigation into D.B. Cooper's cold case. The link is in the description. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about history. This is Obscure Chronicle signing off.